How's that? Shall we stand for our Gospel reading? A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 7th chapter, beginning at the 11th verse. Glory be to thee, O Lord. And it came to pass that Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went with him. As he approached the gate of the town, a man who had died was being carried out. He was his mother's only son, and she was a widow, and with her was a large crowd from the town. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion for her, and said to her, "Do not weep." Then he came forward and touched the funeral bier, and the bearers stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." The dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. Now fear seized all of them, and they glorified God, saying, "Surely a great prophet has risen among us, and God has looked favourably on his people." This word about him spread throughout Judea and all the surrounding region. This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise be to thee, O Christ. Lord, grant that through the written word and through the spoken word we may behold the living word, our Saviour Jesus Christ. Amen. A few weeks ago, I was talking with a mother who recently lost her son. It's hard when we lose our parents. It's hard when we lose our partner, our spouse. But the loss of a child surely goes against the natural order of life. And to lose a child must be the hardest thing for any parent to bear. Today's reading from Luke's Gospel certainly tugs at the heartstrings. The widow of Nain was in an unenviable position. Her husband had died, and her son was the only breadwinner. And together with her grief, the sense of loss, now without him, she faced a very uncertain future, and quite possibly a life of poverty, perhaps even starvation. In first century Palestine, at the time of Jesus, if you encountered a funeral procession, it was customary to join it out of respect and go along to the place of burial with the family and everyone else. St. Luke tells us that Jesus, accompanied by his disciples and followed by a crowd of others, he met the procession as it was leaving the entrance gate to the town. But instead of joining the procession, he stopped it and brought the woman's son back to life. As all the gospel writers make clear, and especially Luke, Jesus had a big, compassionate heart. I won't ask for a show of hands this morning, but many Christians find it difficult, if not impossible, to believe that all the miracles recorded in the Gospels actually took place. But what do we mean when we use the term miracle? What is a miracle? How do you define it? We speak of technological miracles, medical miracles, economic miracles. Such miracles are produced by man or nature, but have they really anything to do with God? In the world of first century Palestine, and indeed throughout the Roman Empire, the civilized world in those days, miracles, or to put it another way, events which seemed miraculous were actually fairly common. And people claimed that all that happened in the world was the result of some form of divine activity. And yes, 2,000 years later, similar claims are still made. But is an earthquake disaster in which thousands are killed supposed to be a miracle in the sense that the rescue of buried people is described as a miracle? Why should we suppose that God is more involved in the rescue than in the earthquake? How can we give God the credit? How can we give God the credit for accidents which turn out well and yet not blame him for fatal accidents? It seems to me that the concept, the definition of what is a miracle is so vague as to be open to all manner of interpretation. What about the miracle of the resurrection, you might be wondering? Well, the resurrection was and is far more than just a sign, a miracle, but that's a sermon for another day, Easter Day, which hopefully we will be able to properly celebrate next year, fingers crossed. Perhaps the key to understanding the miracle stories in the Gospels, perhaps the key lies within the Old Testament, where miracles invariably mean something. In the Old Testament, what God says is usually closely linked with what God does. I'm not a biblical scholar, I'm not an academic, but years ago when I was training at theological college, I learned that the Hebrew word for miracle is dabar, if I've pronounced that correctly. And dabar means both a word and an action. And the two were very closely linked together in Hebrew thought. God's actions could be regarded as an extension of his word. So, for example, at the time of the Exodus, when the Israelites escaped Egypt and went off to the Promised Land, the remarkable deeds performed by Moses were not just wonders intended to impress. They were part of God's plan for his people. And as some of you I'm sure will know, the word miracle in the Gospels, originally written in Greek, actually means a sign. Means a sign. And as we all know, signs point to something. And Jesus was pointing people towards God and his kingdom through his words and his extraordinary deeds. So it seems to me that it's not so much the wow factor of Jesus' miracles that is important. The importance is in what they signify. And what do they point to? They point towards new life with God, a new relationship with God in this world and in the next. Miracles in themselves are not proof that someone has been sent by God. I've often said this, I'm not a Christian because I believe that Jesus raised people from the dead, or because Jesus turned water into wine. Miracles are the way in which those who already believe try to describe as best they can what has happened. And for those of us who are Christians, they properly belong within the area of faith. They're not pieces of evidence to enforce it. You can't, I don't know about you, but I found you can't argue someone into becoming a Christian. And ultimately our response to all the miracles, all the signs performed by Jesus depends upon our response to that crunch question, the most important question Jesus ever asks his disciples. Who do you say I am? Magician or Messiah? Magician or Messiah? We've all heard, I'm sure, of St. Thomas Aquinas. Lived a long time ago, back in the 13th century. And one of the reasons we still remember Thomas Aquinas is because he was a very wise man. And I finish with his words. For those with faith, no evidence is necessary. For those without it, no evidence will ever suffice. For those with faith, no evidence is necessary. For those without it, no evidence will ever suffice. Amen.